Like specific concepts like,
really simple file structure. Because I knew that Drupal 7 was ultra simple, where it's .info, .module, .install, or like the base files you needed.
Right.
That's really what I'm curious about first. It's just the minimal structure to get it.
Okay.
Yes. Service scenes.
Yeah, service. Okay. All right.
Can we talk about configuration management?
I can't, but somebody probably can. Like, I mean, I know conceptually, but if anybody's done configuration management, April.
The extent of configuration management has been running one command.
Yeah.
Which is
That's what I hear. Like you export
and
then
import.
import.
Well, let's see where we can go, because I mean, I know you can set up a lot of stuff in the module as config files, but how do you manage like redoing a module and reloading all that? And because I've had problems with, you can't load this config, it already exists.
Okay.
Small little annoyances like that. How do people deal with that? It's like I'm assigning my nodes in the module so that they can just be loaded when the module gets
Okay.
And I don't know how people are managing that configuration stuff. Like,
I don't
manually on a module like that.
I don't either. I know configuration management from the
features replacement.
Yes, exactly. CLI, export configuration, import configuration, and I minimally know that.
So like drush revert, drush
features
update.
Yeah, but somebody, I'm going to say April will teach us all about configuration management. Anything else? We want to start with this?
Name, like a quick overview on kind of like required namespaces.
Yes.
Needing to before you start the development.
Yeah, that's no problem.
That's actually what prompted me was I started going through like get started guide on like Drupal development namespaces was on one of the topics. So I read a little bit about it.
It's not that hard once you do it twice, you know. It's like, and I'll show you the pattern you need to know. And once you know the pattern, you're going. Okay, so I'm going to add one here, and that is like 7v8 concepts around. This is the main. The first thing I want to do is the main points. If you know Drupal 7 development, that you should just go ahead and move your mind towards for Drupal 8. And let's start with, I'm going to do file structure, then I'll do 7v8 concepts, and then we'll jump around. If anybody has any other questions, just throw them out there. So the file structure of a Drupal 7 site is a Drupal 7 module. Let's just go ahead and assume that my module is called custom module.
Yeah.
And so we're inside the custom module folder immediately, okay? So in 7 you have, I need a shorter name already. We'll call it custom mod.
There you go.
We have a .module file. We have the .info file. Oop, there we go. And we have the .install file, which is optional. And then you have, from there it's the Wild West, whatever you want. Like whatever you want, wherever you want to put your
file.
Yeah. You can include it in the info file for certain things. Other things you would do like module load include. And how you structure the rest of the module outside of this is completely up to this module file. Like you just tell it where files are by normal PHP mechanisms, like including the file. So with 8, it's pretty much the same on these files, except for with the introduction of YAML. So YAML is the file format that looks like JSON, but it's not JSON at all. It's actually just a brand new format that I think Fabian invented for Symfony, and it's just sort of grown outside of Symfony a little bit. But so a few things. The only thing that becomes a YAML file that used to exist is the info. So in 8, you still have custom mod if you want it. Your .module file. Your .info file becomes .info.yaml, And your install file, if you need it, is still just .install. So from a very basic level, like that's the simple of converting one to the other. Yeah.
You said your .module file if you need it.
Yeah, you don't have to have a .module file. This is optional. This is optional.
It'll still get recognized by Drupal without a .module file?
Absolutely. It's actually optional in Drupal 7. Yeah, but you can't do anything without a module file.
The info file is all it picks up and really
Yeah, but
So you've got a module file that doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's just no way to do anything in Drupal 7 outside of the module file. So, I mean, maybe the info file can automatically include some other files. Yeah. But these things are optional. I don't know why I put a star next to the optional ones, but
we get it.
Yeah. But and so everything else in Drupal 7 right here is the Wild West. Just put your files wherever you want. If you want them in a folder, put them in a folder. All that matters is how you choose to include them in your .module file. So in Drupal 8, though, since we're going to object-oriented, with that move to object-oriented is the adoption of the Composer autoloader. So PHP autoloading and namespaces are very much connected, and I'll get into the specifics of that in a moment. But basically, what it means is autoloading is automatically including your file, your class, as when it is asked for by the system. So in Drupal 7, if you're just doing this procedural code, you just include all of your files at the beginning, and then they're there. But in Drupal 8, but really in object-oriented, you may have 100 classes that are only ever instantiated when they're actually called. And that is autoloading. So the way that autoloading works is there's expectations between the autoloader, which is just PHP, and PHP that's controlled by a composer, and the namespace of your classes. So in Drupal 8, the composer autoloader expects the root of your classes to exist inside a directory called source. So any classes you write in Drupal 8 must live inside source in order for them to be autoloaded. And so that's the general overview of file structure. Now, let's get a little further. So when I said that this is where you have to put classes, that's exactly what I mean. So say you want CSS or JavaScript, well then you put that wherever you want. You're just going to have to tell Drupal where those files are. But a lot of times you'll see it like this, just where the JS and CSS file are right there in the module root. And additionally, say you're creating an entity in Drupal 8 in your module, such as a configuration entity that has settings. So say your module has settings, and it's got a settings page and everything. And you're going to need to have default values for your settings. So that's where we're still at this top level inside the module right here. So that's where you'll use the config directory. This one is actually expected. So expected. This is just whatever I wanted to do. Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
Which is the opposite of required.
It's the exact opposite of required in this example. So in config, you have two other folders that are expected, so we're still working with a module that has settings, and so settings have two different concepts that we need to take into account. We have the schema for your settings, which is going to be a YAML file that defines the types of your data. So say your settings have a checkbox to enable, disable, and it's got a text field where you can just put any value. So your schema file is going to be a YAML file for whatever your setting is called. Not to go too far down this road, but let's just say we have custom mod.schema.yaml. And inside this YAML file, we're going to say that my settings, I have two settings. I have one setting called enabled, and it is of type Boolean. And I have another setting called someText, and it is of type string. So the schema just defines the data types of our configuration object. Also inside of the config is a folder called install. So it looks like this. Totally, this is a great example. And this is the value for your settings when your module's enabled. So this is another YAML file, and we're going to match it to this, but it's going to be called install. So like custom mod.install.yaml, and sorry, inside of this, I'm going to say that the enable setting is false, and someText is Jonathan. And so that's basically how you define configuration objects that relate to your module inside of a Drupal 8 module. Okay. So that's really all there is to file structure without going into namespaces. Everything we talk about with namespaces has to do with PHP. And so everything having to do with namespaces is actually object-oriented PHP, Juno, and everything about that will go into the functions directory. Any questions so far? Because I'm going to start erasing.
This is great.
Okay, cool. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Oh my God. Do we need water?
Would you say releasing?
What if this is permanent?
Yes. Oh, you're fine if it's permanent. You can eventually get it off, but you're longer.
Take a grinder.
Yeah.
That literally did nothing.
Really?
It's a good thing I'm recording.
The legal department.
Yes. We capture everything.
That marker was in here. I did not bring that marker.
Okay.
That's permanent.
See, I thought you brought the green one.
I did bring it. The green one erases. So we're going to need a whole new whiteboard.
Let's move now.
Oh, safe thing.
All of it, yeah, except for the pictures with that list on the right. Thank you. Look at that.
Well,
I was just about to say it.
I mean, there's a lot of red on this.
All right, what brand is this, and where can I buy it?
That works.
So we good here?
Thank you, sir.
That's
Yes.
Don't use the red.
Okay, so from now on we're working inside of
my 2020.
the source directory. I'm not going to capitalize it. That's just confusing.
Spell it out
SRC.
Yes. Okay, so now we're going to make a class in Drupal that doesn't do anything, but we want Composer to be able to find that class inside of our module as soon as it's needed. Move this somewhere else. So just know we're in the source directory. All right, so I'm going to write a class like this, and this class is going to be called Bio.
Oh,
B-
bio.
That works.
Like that? All right. So this is class bio. And I want it to live. I want it to live somewhere a little complicated. So let's say that this is. I'm going to make up a folder called Cool People. Cool. Thank you. That works.
See what's going on?
No, that's a great idea.
Hey, smile. Hey, bio. There you go. Cool people.
All right, that's a perfect example because it gives us 2 words. Just to show that this is a capital C. Okay, so this is where our file lives. So what I need to do is I need to namespace my class so that the Composer autoloader knows where to find it. In the background of Drupal, it connects module paths to the module path to Composer, but from there my namespace tells it where this file lives inside of the folder structure. So I'm going to give this a namespace of Drupal / custom mod, which is the name of my module, / cool / people semicolon. And so what Composer is going to do in the background is we are going to, somewhere else in the system, we're going to call this class. And Composer is going to say like, okay, so somebody called the class of Drupal custom mod cool people bio. That means we need to look inside of the source directory of the custom module.
Okay, that's why source is
Yeah. So it looks inside of our custom module. Drupal says custom modules. Drupal tells composers custom modules will store their classes inside of the source directory. And Composer says, well, that means that when somebody calls this class, I can go look for that Drupal module inside the source directory, and then I can match cool, people, bio. And that's how it auto-loads. So the namespace tells Composer where to auto-load the class.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's more than just namespace, it's actually
Yeah.
also a path.
Yeah, and this is a PSR4, which is this was the standard defined by FIG, the PHP working group, that comes up with standards that different frameworks should use, and that makes our code interoperable theoretically, not Drupal code, but arbitrary libraries. It makes it interoperable with other frameworks. So if you pull in a library that does something like what's something a library that it makes all strings lowercase, right? Just something dumb. So if you pull in a library that makes all strings lowercase, if that library follows the standard of PSR4, you can pull that into Laravel, you can pull it into Drupal, you can pull it into I guess Zen probably, any framework that, not WordPress.
It's still functional PHP.
Any framework that respects PSR4 as a standard. All right. So any questions about this? Like, the idea is that you have any classes stored inside your source directory, and any file structure following that. And as long as this part of your file structure matches this part of your namespace, then it will auto-load.
And we always have to, if we're going to get the class, we have to call Drupal / custom mod, custom cool, custom people, unless we say use. We use the use.
Yes. So that's more into namespaces.
Yeah.
But exactly. And the common things you'll see in Drupal 8 are you'll see. Here's the things you'll see. You'll see like plugin, form, what are some other controller? Yeah, but you'll see all these things as like folders where modules store different classes, but fundamentally, you should not be required. Now, there's going to be some edge case where it's like plugins have to be in the plugin folder, but really, like that, this isn't required by Drupal. This folder structure of plugins in the plugin folder. It's required by your namespace, and your namespace is informing Composer where your file lives in the file system. Any questions?
No, actually it made sense.
It made complete sense.
Sweet.
Yes.
All right. Then, so that's namespaces and auto-loading are related. Is the point? Nothing can be auto-loaded if the namespace doesn't match an expectation. Do you want to see using and namespace? Okay. So.
Well, all right, time to move room.
What? Maybe we should just go over the rooms. We should be in the hallway.
I have a small question. In Drupal 7, there were module dependencies, and now when I write dependencies, I see the option to. This is kind of a backwards question, but like, were you ever able to say I need this module, but only this version and up in Drupal 7?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, you can do that absolutely, and sometimes
The dependencies seems to be based on like Composer, the way Composer would call it now.
Yeah, I don't know the syntax. I don't know if that's changed. All I know is that I've used it in both, and I've looked it up every time I've needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What he's talking about is in your info file. You have dependencies, and you can say that my dependency is on just made up the node module greater than version 8.5 or something like that. It's like your module can depend on a specific version of another module. Okay, so let's look at namespaces being used practically, and we're going to do this in just a raw PHP file that is not a class. And then I'll use it in a class, maybe under here somewhere. So I've just got a raw PHP file. It's called jonathan.php, and I've got a function here. It's totally not a class, but I got a function called do stuff. I'm creative.
Absolutely.
And what I need inside of this function is I need that cool people bio class, right? So how do I get that class into here? Well, there's two ways to do it. One, I can access the class directly by telling PHP that I'm the entire namespace of the class. So I can say bio equals starting at the global scope is the first backslash Drupal custom mod cool people bio. And that will instantiate a new bio by calling
Not very elegant.
by calling it by its namespace from like the global root. Okay. But there's another thing we can do, and like, what if I need to instantiate a bunch of bios, right? Like, I don't want to type this out every single time. So what I can do, I'm just going to comment this out real quick. So what I can do is I can actually say that this whole PHP file wants to pull in a namespace, and it wants to pull in a class within a namespace. And I do that by using the use keyword. So use, and then I'm going to spell it all out. You don't need to You don't need to define that this starts in the global scope. It always does. But Drupal custom mod, cool people. Whoop. Ooh. All right, here we go.
So
But-
it always starts in the global. Why should you use it when you're defining bio?
So the use keyword just knows that you're starting from the
Oh,
global.
but the variable doesn't.
Yeah, but well, see what happens is once you start, if this file was within the namespace, or if I started other using namespaces, then all the other PHP might think I'm in that namespace, and so you say like start at the global. Whenever you're doing something by calling its entire namespace class, start at the global.
So you're not working within an existing context that you've already set up.
Exactly.
Relative.
Yeah, and so actually we can show that relativeness in an example after this. Okay.
Because when you use the use keyword, it doesn't care where you are. It will always start.
Yeah, always starts global. The use keyword is always the global reference. Yeah. So now that I'm using this fully namespace class, I can just say B1 is bio. B2 is another bio. Oops. Because this whole file, the whole file, is now using this namespace class, and so
Shouldn't the namespace be without bio now? Just or with people?
it should be what?
Shouldn't bio.
Should end at people. The slash bio should be gone.
No. So what I'm doing is I'm actually pulling this class into the whole file as a reference to this class.
In the namespace, you don't.
That's just a function name of the class.
Yeah.
In the namespace,
Yeah.
that's right.
So
Class here.
Right.
you could.
That's what
Oh,
it's
that's
doing.
the constructor.
That's what it's doing.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm instantiating.
But if you're in some
I'm
random
constructing the class.
Yeah, when I use all these,
I'm just telling. This is just the namespace of the
Only on
class.
name-
Fully
it'll
namespace
know.
of the classes.
I mean,
And
it
so,
could be more than one class.
What you can do with this is we could only include people, and we could work within the entire people namespace. But
Well, if each class was really small.
what that means is we have to start down here
Things to experiment
with the people namespace. So we have to say people bio. See that? And so maybe there's a lot of people in our module, and so I don't want to necessarily use every single class explicitly. I don't want to import every single class as a user. So maybe that's people bio, and this is now. I'm wondering if I'm showing people right.
You're good.
We can
But
write
why do we
something.
spell them that way?
Great. So now that sort of pulls in that folder, but you still have to reference. It's not a folder because it's part of a namespace, but you still have to reference this last item. The last item in the namespace is where you start down here, and so you can do tricks with this. We'll call them tricks. And you can actually alias your imports so that you could say, I'm just going to use Drupal custom cool people bio as April. Right? And so then if you wanted, you can say, I should be writing the new keyword here.
Yeah.
Sorry. Unless it's
Yeah, that too.
new
That's a no-no.
April. And that's actually,
Alias.
yeah, and that's actually an instance of the bio class. Is that too much to
No, that makes sense. I just don't think you would ever do that, would you?
I mean, yeah, you might.
Like extending another library that you didn't write, or...
You could just shorten it, maybe like the name of the class is
So there's that convenience idea, but also let's consider. So we're in a raw we're in a raw thing. So raw PHP that has nothing to do with our modules. But I'm dealing with two different custom modules that implement a cool people bio, right? So I'm going to use one. Shouldn't have had to erase all of that. Custom mod. Yeah, we'll just do cool. This is the example. Just erase people.
Spell people wrong.
All right, and then I'm going to use this totally different module called what that also has a cool
I see.
people bio. But now, how does it know when I say new bio? How does it know? Right? Well, it can't know. You're going to have a problem. So you're going to say that this one is as what bio? Or whatever you want to call it.
Okay, I see. I see now.
And so now you go B2 is equal to new what bio? So that's why you might want to do this.
Okay.
Is it fixed to more camel face and
Yeah.
object oriented?
And what now?
And object oriented.
That's PSR4.
Yeah, it's part of. I think it's part of PSR4. It's definitely one of the conventions, and it's not camel case when it starts with a capital. It's called something else.
There you go.
Module. And so that's
Oh, so
how.
you got a version.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's nice.
that requires the system greater than or equal to 8.3.
Nice.
Is there a source folder in there where we can just look at their classes?
Yeah.
I have an example, but someone else.
I'm sure they're web form. Oh, it's going to have a ton of classes.
Because I personally build a module that extend basically migrate, and it uses a lot of plugins essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, really, my questions again are going to be on things.
Okay, so it's got some just in the source file,
Right.
or source directory, and then
Okay, so based on what we learned, we should be able to guess what these namespaces are, right? So this is directly in the source directory. So what do we think the namespace is for this file?
gosh,
Drupal, web form,
yeah,
can't see, whatever that says.
Web form
It shouldn't have
submits.
anything.
Yeah, it should be Drupal web.
Yeah,
What's the
submission generated. So web form submission generated. And there you go.
There we go. Drupal web form. So go back and let's go into some other folder and let's guess what the namespace is going to be, and then let's check. So go up and there's like, I mean really anything. Let's pick random just to see how right we are. And if there's another folder inside of that, let's go into that. Go into one of these. All right, so what's the namespace of this file right here?
Drupal web form plugin block web form block.
That's
No.
No.
Oh,
mine's-
mine is the web form block.
Yeah,
It's the,
yeah. Go
just the
ahead.
directory. Sorry.
So Drupal web form plugin block. That's how it all works.
Okay.
Sausage gets
We might not have time to, but quick on anything within comments that do things.
Yes,
That is a big troll in my mind.
that is.
Oh.
Those are called annotations, and those are shortcuts from developers or for developers by developers. But so here's a great way to think about it, and this actually applies to what I was wanting to get into with 7 V8 concepts in general. So in Drupal 7, the only not PHP we write where we register something with the greater system is the .info file. You write a .info file, and Drupal auto reads that. Drupal takes that data from the info file and puts it somewhere in the system. So with Drupal, but there are plenty of places where we write PHP where we register data into the system that is then later dealt with. So a great example of that is hook menu. Has anybody written hook menu to define a new path or route in Drupal? Yeah. So in hook menu, like as an example, what you do is, just to throw this up in case somebody hasn't done it.
Are we talking about Drupal 7 hook menu?
Yeah, this is Drupal 7 hook menu. You just define some array full with like a path. Sure. And then inside of that, you define a bunch of data, which is necessary for routing. And then all you do is you return that array. So this is super common in more than just hook menu, but in Drupal 7. So this is registering something with the greater Drupal system that Drupal will then use to do some other part of it. With hook menu, hook menu is way overloaded in Drupal 7. Hook menu is defining a route, it's defining the permissions for a route, it's defining what type of menu item it is for the route, the arguments for the route, all this stuff. But in Drupal 8, you'll rarely have to write PHP to register something new with the greater Drupal system. There are cases where you'll write a hook to register something, but in most cases, all that has moved to YAML files or to annotations. So with hook menu as an example, that's now been broken up to where we got our custom module that has now just been renamed mod. And so now what used to be hook menu is now mod.routes.yaml, which defines the path, what arguments are expected on the path, and the callback. Which, I'm sorry?
Routing.
Is it routing?
Yeah.
Okay. Which basically defines a few things, mostly about the path, what arguments are expected in that path, what are allowed in the path, and the callback that happens when that path is visited. Are you on the routing file now? Oh, sweet. Okay. And access control for that route, which can be handled in another way if you want. But there's different ways to register routes. But just know that from hook menu, the path concept is now in routing. The menu concept, like literally does it appear in a menu inside of Drupal, is now in mod. Is it menu or menus? Actually, no, hold on. It's links. Links.yaml.
This one actually has a difference.
Links.menu.
It's got links.action.yaml, links.action.yaml.
Forget. Menu? Okay,
More files. We need to put one line of text somewhere. Create a file.
Right.
But at least it's structured.
Action.
It's structured. Yes.
And we got paths. So paths. Okay. So all of these files replace that one hook menu. And the reason is because that one hook menu was doing way too much.
A lot. Huge.
Yeah. And there were like, basically you had like the type from a item in an array of hook menu represented one of these three things. So now, like for example, a tab in Drupal 7, you set the type of that hook menu item to menu default local task or menu local task. And so basically all hook menu got broken into these things. And the point is that a lot of those things that you used to register in PHP are now registered in YAML files. But now we got to get to annotations. So the other way the other type of data that we used to register in PHP in Drupal 7 was info about like hook entity info alters. So hook block info Is that what it was called? Where you define a new block? And all you're doing is you're making arrays and you're returning it, and that's how Drupal knows that block exists.
Yeah.
But, so those things, some of those things have been converted into annotations. And I have a great blog post on this. Daggerhart.com. Can you blow this up a lot? Because it'd be easier just for me to. So an annotation is, first of all, it has to be expected. You can't just throw one of these out somewhere and it automatically do something. So somewhere in the Drupal system, somebody wrote an annotation for the block, for blocks specifically. And the format for this is basically looks like this. So at some function name, sometimes called an object if you look in the documentation for annotations. And then you're passing parameters into that function. And those parameters are named. So the ID of that block is web form. Wow.
This does feel weird. If it's doing something.
I mean, I don't have to copy that exactly, but these things can be whatever. So you'll often see label for plugin related stuff, and it might just be called whatever. And also you can have, some annotations will have arrays or sub objects or whatever, I don't know what they're called originally. But let's say that there's this other property that this annotation expects. So you can fill this, no matter what this is, you can fill it full of all the data you want. But what happens is Drupal loads it, Drupal looks for it, Drupal parses this, really Symfony does, but and then something else in the system decides to use that information. So you can have an array of
We're putting things inside of things in a cover.
Well, the best way to think about it is not that it's a comment, but we're using comments to store registry information, and it just looks like a comment because
It didn't belong in another file.
Yeah. I mean, basically, I think we can also blame Fabian for this. Pontus, what's this guy's name that wrote Symfony? I think he also came up with annotations for PHP.
But this is, it's reading this, it's parsing this before the module code is even run. I'm
Yes. Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm putting on.
Yeah, so this, so let's just say that I did a great example for block here. So this annotation code is the equivalent to hook block info in Drupal 7. So if we went to Drupal 8 and we wrote our blocks as an object and it's a plugin and whatnot, and you wrote all this out and we didn't have the annotation system, well then somewhere in your custom module you'd have to write hook block info and point it to this class. So annotations is a replacement for, and therefore saves you having to write these hooks in your module file.
Stupid question here.
No, it's super.
Is this part of that, and I don't even know what you called it, something for that standard
PS4.
PS4?
Oh.
Is this part of PS4? as
Yep.
well?
No, this is part of Symfony, and it's so Symfony. If y'all haven't done much with Symfony, is actually just generally it's just a collection of a whole bunch of packages that Fabian and the Symfony team has written that are random libraries, and then the Symfony kernel. Well, not the kernel. I'm not sure. One part of Symfony puts all those libraries together into like where you get a web request and then a web response. And so that's the foundation of the website is that there is a request and an adequate response. So all of these things that are individual components made by the Symfony team or under the Symfony namespace, and they're put together to make a framework. And this is kind of what's complicated about Symfony as a concept is Symfony as a framework is made up of a whole bunch of tiny Symfony components. Annotations is one Symfony component. Drupal is built on the Symfony framework, so therefore it's full of tiny Symfony components. And this is how we decided to use annotations. I mean, not we. I was not involved in this. But yeah.
So I'm looking at your blog.
Yeah.
And I see kind of the same topic of defining an entity. This kind of plays with
Yes.
same
The actual blog post I was talking about, which one are you on?
This one is I'm on part 3.
Go to part 1. Part 1 explains everything about annotations.
Okay.
Drupal 8 content entity bundles, part 1. Yeah. So that goes into what an annotation is, the syntax behind annotations, and then I think it actually digs into the content entity and configuration entity, annotation expectations of Drupal. So it's really vague to start, and it just covers what an annotation is. So you get that, and some other side thing. How much time do we have left? I don't know how these things work.
So I think we started like 1:20-ish.
Okay.
So I'd say we got like 3 minutes.
Okay. Y'all want to know about services next? Because that's about the last thing we talked about. I honestly just don't know configuration management well enough.
So you put that off on April though, right?
Yeah. You don't have to. Okay, so services. Who has heard of services before? All right. So what is a service? So a service is a globally available object that does something. It's a class that you can reach out into the global scope through a mechanism called a service locator, and then pull that object into be used. So, what's an example? A good example of a service is the date formatter, and I only say that that's a good example because it's one I'm thinking of. But in Drupal 7, I think there was a function and it was called format date. And that format date function expected like some timestamp, and then the Drupalism of the string that represents the date format, such as short. That might be in the wrong order. You might say short first, and then some timestamp. But then what that would do is that would spit out whatever you have set up in Drupal as the short date format, which you do through the UI. So in Drupal 8, rather than have these global functions that sort of do a lot of, basically, rather than having global functions for a different reason, dependency injection. We're not come back to that, but so rather than that, we have an object that is called a date formatter. And it has one method on it called format. And that method expects a timestamp and a Drupalism, which is the machine name for the date format. So the question is, how do you get this object? Right? So we're in some random PHP code. Let's call it down here. So we're in some random PHP, Jonathan.php down here. And I need that global date formatter. Well, being object-oriented, being a class, I could instantiate a whole new date formatter, which would probably look something like Drupal, I'm guessing it's in this namespace, Drupal core date formatter. New Drupal core date time date formatter, whatever. and I could give it all the different constructor parameters. But really, like, does Drupal 8 as a system for one web request need to instantiate 20 different date formatters everywhere a date format is required? No, because this was just fine. You had one function that did a thing. So what you do is you have a service called date formatter, which is this globally available object that we can just go get through the service locator and then use wherever we want. And using the service locator looks like this. I'm going to take some more root first. So using the service locator looks like this. We say Drupal service, and then the name of this service, which happens to be date.formatter. Okay, so remember that, because the name of the service is going to come up later when we register our own new service. So I'm like, give me this df date formatter, and then I can start using it. So I'm using the Drupal service locator to go get the service named date formatter, date.formatter. Okay? So this all replaces a function, but the reason behind it all is dependency injection, which I'm not sure we'll really have time to get into. But just know that this is how I go get a service by its name. So now what we want to do is we want to register our own service. So we want to make our own magical object that does this thing, and it does it great. And what it does is, I was going to say it instantiates BIOS, but that analogy is done. Let's just say it does cool thing. Follow me here, all right? So in our module, we're going to define mod.services.yaml. Because here we are registering something new into the Drupal system. So it's going to be a YAML file, or it's going to be an annotation. In this case, it's a YAML file. And inside my YAML file, I'm going to say that I'm going to define a new object called services, and I'm going to name my service, and it's going to be called does_cool. All right, that's the name of my service. And so now what I got to do is I got to name my service. Now I need to tell it what class this service represents this service, or will be instantiated as this service. So I'm just going to say that the class is Drupal mod, and we're going to pretend, since we know about namespaces and everything, we're going to pretend that I just made a file called doescool.php in the source directory. No problem. All right? So I've defined a new service called doescool in my module. And so now somewhere else in jonathan.php, if anybody needs this super class that does awesome stuff, then all they have to do is use the service locator. They just say Drupal service, the name of my service, which is doescool_cool, and now they have my class from any other module throughout all of Drupal. So this is defining a very simple service. And this is how you access generically, like outside of an object-oriented context, this is how you use the service locator to access any other service. And a lot of these things are, it's pretty much a safe bet that all the stuff you dealt with in Drupal 7 that was just some function has now become a service. Because you can't inject the function, you can't as a dependency of some other class. Instead, you have to inject. Instead, what you do is you inject the service. So a little bit of dependency injection. But here's a great example of this. If y'all have Drupal open in front of you, you can actually go to the core. Let's see, where you can go into the core folder, you can go into the lib folder, you can open up Drupal.php. And inside that, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff that you might have seen already. Like how do you make the old style link in Drupal 8? You do Drupal : 8. Right? So like this is how you do that now. But if you look inside of that Drupal folder, you'll actually see that this method is calling a service locator, and it's just a shortcut for using one of the services. Good?
We're ready to do forms whenever you
All right.
we're gonna take a break first, and then whenever we can reconvene. So you can feel free to. I wasn't trying to cut you off. This looks like magic going on.
Yeah.
So far, it's been great.
It's whiteboard action.
Yeah. So okay. So let's talk about.
You know, there's more money in training than actually writing code.
Oh, is it? Really?
Good job.
Does that
Just train
shortcut
it.
apply to using it in custom code? So could you, in theory, drop service and do does cool and pass in the variable?
No. So this is a shortcut that they wrote in Drupal.php. Yeah. So this is explicitly written somewhere in Drupal.php. Okay. So actually, we are set up to look at a dependency injection by accident. Okay. So say my does cool object, right? One of the cool things it does is it formats dates, right? So what I need as a dependency of my does cool class is I need the date formatter, and I'll write that class in just a second. But let's erase this for a second. And instead, let me first tell you how I'm going to pass that dependency in. It's real simple. All I do is I say args, and this is going to look like the array syntax, at date.formatter. So this is all just syntax, so don't get caught up in the at sign or whatnot. This is stuff you'll just look at every time you need. So now what I've said is that if this class can accept dependency injection, if it's set up for it, then I want you to send the date formatter automatically into this class, right? So now all we need to do is we need to write our class and set it up for dependency injection, and then we're going to use it. So this is going to crash course dependency. Okay? So I'm going to write a new class. We're going to pretend like the namespace is right. So PHP and namespace blah. So class does cool. All right. Implements. Let me think if this is the best way. First, I'll come back to that one. So my class does cool, and somewhere on my class, I'm going to store. I'm going to expect to get a date formatter. All right, and so I'm going to store that as a property on my class. Okay, and so that's the basics. And now what I need to do is I need to tell my class how to accept a dependency being injected. So this is just a dumb class, and we plan to add a date formatter to it through a dependency injection. All I need to do is I need to tell my class that it implements container injection interface. Okay? And we might be getting a little deep here. But so this interface says that I must define a method on my class called create. So I'm going to have a public function called create. Now, this create function comes with a container full of services. Or actually, I mean, it's not a container full of services, but they call it a container. So you can think of it as a container full of services. Now, what my public static create function must do is return an instance of this class with the dependencies from the container being provided to that instance. I feel like I'm going into the weeds here, so apologies if this is. So return static container get date.formatter. That's two closing. That's all. Okay. Last thing, I need to define the constructor on my class, which looks like hub func construct. And now, since the create method is passing in the date formatter, I can expect the date formatter to come into the constructor. So this is essentially, I don't know if you're familiar. Man, in fact, this is on tape. Makes me want to watch my words because there's a lot of technically incorrect stuff here. But this is essentially like the container injection interface, where you provide a static function that creates an instance of itself. Is this class has a factory that produces itself. That's weird and circular, but inside of this class is a static function that is actually a factory that produces this class. And so when this class is finally produced and instantiated, all we're going to do is we're going to say this date formatter equals whatever the date formatter that was passed into the new instance. Okay. All right. So we've got our class. We've registered it as a service. We've told it that it expects that we want to inject the date formatter service into ours. So these are services injecting services into our, okay, whatever. So now let's just finally use it so it means something. So PHP.
Does everybody understand this reference?
The context of this?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I went into object-oriented pretty heavily here.
And what this is supposed to do, but I couldn't tell you what this is in the context.
So
It's just the object.
This is
object, right?
yeah.
It's the class inside the, or the function inside the class that's inside a class.
Yeah. So okay. So
Does cool object.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's itself. So this class, you can think of a class as a template that does nothing at all.
Right.
But when you instantiate the class, now it's an object that does things. So when the class is being instantiated, it's an object that knows about itself. And what it knows about itself is that it's called this. Does that help?
No, that makes exact sense.
Just rename it to mine.
It's sort of like you're Jonathan, but you know yourself as me.
Right.
Yeah, it's grammar.
Exactly. It's a frame of reference.
Yeah.
Me equals this.
Yeah. So later, I'm over here in raw PHP, procedural PHP land. It doesn't matter what's happening here. But now I'm going to go get my service called doesCool. We're almost done, I swear. And I'm going to go get it the way that I showed you how to get services through the locator. I mean, assume that I'm in, when I say procedural code, assume that I'm in hook form alter. You know,
Okay.
I'm in some Drupal hook that's done procedurally because they're all done that way. Service does, I'm going to go get the doesCool service. All right. And now that when I go get that service, I can say print my doesCool object date formatter, format, time, which is just some timestamp, short. All right, and that's the point. The point is that a question or is that a field goal? Okay.
Both.
Yeah.
So I know this is an example.
Mm-hmm.
In your code, would you possibly be doing something with that date formatter different from accessing the service of date format by itself?
Totally. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. So can you actually pull up GitHub real quick, and I can just show, or you can actually look on the most recent blog post, hooks and events.
Shameless self-promotion.
Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to me on YouTube.
Hit that like and subscribe button.
Yeah. So if you go to github.com/ actually go into the blog post will work. And can you, the very first one. Yeah, and can you Apple Play it? And can you scroll down to the, keep going until I write an event on user, this actually isn't injected, but I didn't get to the dependency injection on this. But I write an event, not config, but the next one, user login event. Keep going. There it is. So this is an event, and that's not what's important. But what's important is that if you scroll down, what this event does is when a user logs in, it tells them when their account was created. And that's it. Sorry, we actually need the subscriber. The events. I'm scrolling. There it is. Background. Yes. Okay. So up a little bit. And we're just looking for the actual on user login function. Keep going. There we go. Okay. So this event, this object subscribes to the event of a user logging in, and it sets a message. Hey, your account was created on this date. And so this isn't injected, but this class depends on the date format. So the better version of this class, which I have written, which is not on this blog post, actually does dependency inject both the database and the date formatter into this event subscriber. That way, this whole thing, every time it's instantiated, has all of its dependencies.
So you can't instantiate the class without its dependencies, opposed to getting to the function and then realizing you don't have it.
Exactly. Exactly. And the version of this, can I help over here? So the version of this, it scrolls unnaturally.
Oh, you're just up and down. The groans in this room.
So many people do that at work, and I just go on the computer, and I'm like, everything is wrong. I'm just like sitting there going like this. I need to go down. I need to go. Slide. I hate you.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah.
So here's that exact same event.
Mostly because it's
with those dependencies injected. So
like I can't
I've implemented
Windows,